I still remember the exact moment the forest started counting us. It was not a sound at first. It was a feeling, like something had opened its eyes in the dark and begun to take inventory. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 5 of us when we walked into the trees. By the time the sun came up, the forest had finished counting. My name is Ryan. I was 22 that summer. Me, my girlfriend Elise, my best friend Marcus, his girlfriend Tara, and my younger brother Leo. We had planned the trip for months. A 3-day camping trip deep in the national forest in northern Michigan. No cell service, no other people for miles. Just tents, a fire, cheap beer, and the kind of quiet you can only find when the world is far away. We arrived in the late afternoon. The trailhead was empty. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. Leo, who was only 19, kept saying how peaceful it felt. Elise held my hand as we walked. Marcus and Tara were already arguing about who would carry the heavier pack. Everything felt normal, everything felt safe. We set up camp in a small clearing beside a stream. 2 tents, 1 fire pit. The trees around us were tall and close together, their branches interlocking high above like a roof. When the sun dropped, the forest turned black faster than any of us expected. That first night we sat around the fire telling stupid stories and laughing too loud. Leo kept shining his flashlight into the trees and making ghost noises. Tara told him to stop. Marcus threw a pine cone at him. Elise leaned against me and said she was glad we came. No one noticed the first wrong thing until much later. I woke up sometime after 2 a.m. needing to piss. The fire had burned down to red coals. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped out into the cold. The stream was still running, the trees were still standing, but the air felt heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. I walked a short distance away from the tents and finished my business. When I turned back, I counted the tents the way you count things when you're half asleep. 1, 2. There should have been 2. I shone my phone light across the clearing. Both tents were there. I told myself I was tired. I crawled back into the tent beside Elise and fell asleep listening to her breathing. In the morning, everything still looked fine. We made coffee. We ate instant oatmeal. Leo wanted to hike to a ridge he'd seen on the map. We left the campsite around 10. The forest was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No birds, no insects. Just the sound of our boots on the trail and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. After an hour, Marcus stopped and frowned. "Did we pass that rock before?" he asked. We all looked. A large grey boulder sat beside the trail, split down the middle. None of us remembered it. The map said we were still on the right path. We kept walking. By early afternoon, the trail began to loop in ways that didn't make sense. We would walk for 20 minutes and end up at the same fallen log. Leo checked his compass. The needle spun slowly, like it couldn't decide which way was north. Elise tried her phone. No signal, of course. We had known there wouldn't be any. We decided to turn back. The walk back took longer than the walk out. The light started to fade, even though it was only 3 o'clock. The trees seemed closer together. The air grew colder. When we finally reached the clearing, the tents were gone. The fire pit was still there, the stream was still there, but the 2 tents, the backpacks, the cooler, everything we had left behind had vanished. The ground where the tents had stood was smooth, as if nothing had ever been placed there. Marcus swore. Tara started to cry. Leo kept saying it had to be a joke. Elise looked at me with wide eyes and asked if I had moved anything. I hadn't. We searched the surrounding trees. Nothing, no footprints except our own, no broken branches, no sign that anyone else had been there. The sun dropped behind the ridge. Darkness came fast. We had no shelter, no food except what was in our day packs, no extra clothes. The temperature was already falling. We built a fire with what dry wood we could find and sat close together. No one spoke for a long time. Then Leo whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first I heard only the stream, then underneath it something else. A soft, rhythmic sound, like someone tapping on wood or counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sound came from different directions at once, as if the trees themselves were speaking the numbers. Tara grabbed Marcus's arm. "We need to leave right now!" We stood up and started walking in the direction we thought led back to the trailhead. The forest did not want us to leave. Every path we took curved back toward the clearing. The counting continued, soft and patient. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After an hour of walking in circles, we stopped. The fire we had left behind was still visible through the trees, a small orange glow. We had not moved more than 100 yards. Marcus lost his temper and started shouting at the dark. "What do you want from us?" The counting stopped. For a moment there was complete silence. Then a new sound began. Footsteps, slow, heavy, circling us just outside the reach of our flashlight beams. The footsteps were not human. They were too evenly spaced, too deliberate, like something that had practiced walking for a very long time. Elise started to cry quietly. Leo held his knife in front of him, even though his hand was shaking. The footsteps stopped directly behind me. I felt cold breath on the back of my neck. A voice spoke. It sounded like dry leaves rubbing together. "We have counted 5. I turned around. There was nothing there. The voice came again, this time from above. "One of you will stay." We ran. We ran without direction, crashing through undergrowth, tripping over roots, tearing our clothes on branches. The forest seemed to open and close around us. Sometimes the path was clear. Sometimes the trees pressed so close we had to turn sideways to pass. I lost sight of the others. I called their names. Only the forest answered. When I finally stopped, lungs burning, I was alone in a small gap between the trees. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I could hear someone crying nearby. It sounded like Elise. I followed the sound. I found her sitting on the ground, with her back against a tree. She looked up at me with relief. I reached for her hand. Her skin was cold, too cold. She smiled the way she always smiled, but her eyes did not blink. "I stayed," she said softly, "so the rest of you could leave." I backed away. The thing that looked like Elise tilted its head. "The forest only needs one," it said in her voice. "The counting is finished." I turned and ran again. I do not know how long I ran. At some point the trees thinned. I saw the faint glow of the parking lot lights through the branches. I crashed out of the forest and fell onto the gravel. My car was still there. Marcus's truck was still there. I waited until morning. No one else came out of the trees. Search and rescue teams spent 2 weeks combing the forest. They found our tents exactly where we had left them, perfectly intact, as if they had never disappeared. They found 4 backpacks. They found the fire pit. They never found Marcus, Tara, Leo, or Elise. The official report said the 4 of them became lost and succumbed to exposure. The forest is large. People get disoriented. It happens. I know better. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind moves through the trees outside my apartment, I hear the counting again. 1, 2, 3, 4. It always stops at 4 now. It is still waiting for the 5th. And every time I close my eyes, I see Elise sitting against that tree, smiling with eyes that do not blink, telling me she stayed so the rest of us could leave. I was the only one who made it out. I'm no longer sure the forest agrees. The fire should not have gone out. We had built it high. We had fed it for hours. The wood was dry, the night was still, there was no wind. And yet, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the flames died as if someone had pressed a hand over them and smothered every spark at once. That was the moment I understood we were no longer alone in the woods. My name is Nathan. I was 24. There were 4 of us that weekend. Me, my girlfriend Sophia, my cousin Derek, and Derek's friend Chris. We had driven 6 hours into the National Forest in Oregon for a 2-night camping trip. No cell service, no other campsites within 3 miles, just us, 2 tents, and the kind of deep quiet that city people pay money to find. We arrived Friday afternoon. The trail was empty. The clearing we chose sat beside a narrow creek. Tall Douglas firs stood in a tight circle around us, their trunks so straight they looked like the bars of a cage. We joked about it while we set up the tents. Chris said the trees were watching us. We all laughed. The first night was perfect. We cooked sausages over the fire. We drank cheap whiskey. Sophia sat between my legs and leaned back against my chest. Derek told the same hunting stories he always told. Chris kept feeding the fire even when it didn't need more wood. No one wanted the light to die. We went to bed around midnight. I remember zipping the tent closed and listening to the creak. I remember Sophia's breathing slowing beside me. I remember thinking that for the first time in months I felt completely safe. I woke to the smell of smoke that was no longer burning. The fire was gone. Not low, not glowing, completely dead. The air was colder than it should have been. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. I sat up. Sophia was still asleep. Outside the tent I heard soft footsteps moving through dry leaves, slow, careful, circling. I reached for the flashlight. When I clicked it on, the beam shook in my hand. I unzipped the tent just enough to look out. The clearing was empty. The fire pit was a black circle of ash. Both tents were still standing, but the footsteps continued just beyond the reach of the light. I whispered Derek's name. No answer. I whispered Chris's name. Nothing. The footsteps stopped directly behind our tent. Something touched the fabric. Not a hand. Something longer. It dragged slowly from the top of the tent down to the ground, like a single finger testing the material. Sophia woke up. "What's wrong?" "Stay quiet," I said. We sat in the dark, listening. The thing outside moved to the other tent. We heard the same long, dragging touch against Derek and Chris's tent. Then silence. For the next hour, nothing happened. The forest made no sound. Even the creek seemed quieter. At 3:30, I couldn't take it anymore. I crawled out with the flashlight and a knife. The clearing was still empty. I walked to the other tent and zipped it open. Derek and Chris were gone. Their sleeping bags were still warm. Their shoes were still inside the tent. Chris's phone lay on the ground, screen cracked, still playing the playlist he had put on before bed. The music was a soft, acoustic song that felt wrong in the silence. I shook Sophia awake and told her. She started to cry. I told her we had to leave now, in the dark if necessary. We packed only what we could carry: water, flashlights, the knife. We left everything else. The trail back to the parking lot was only 2 miles, but the forest had changed. Trees that had stood straight the day before now leaned inward. The path kept narrowing. Several times we had to push through branches that had not been there before. After 40 minutes, we heard footsteps again, not behind us, beside us, matching our pace on both sides of the trail, just out of sight. Sophia grabbed my arm. "They're hurting us!" I didn't answer. I already knew she was right. We started running. The footsteps ran with us. When we slowed, they slowed. When we stopped, they stopped. Always just beyond the light. The trail ended in a wall of trees. The path we had followed in was gone. In its place stood a dense stand of firs packed so tightly no human could pass. We turned back. The clearing was waiting for us. Our tents were still there. The fire pit was still cold. But now there were 5 sets of footprints in the soft ground around the fire. 4 led into the tents. 1 set walked in a slow circle around both tents and then stopped at the edge of the trees, toes pointing inward, as if something had stood there watching for a long time. Sophia sat down hard on the ground and started shaking. I tried the emergency whistle we had brought. The sound died the moment it left my mouth, swallowed by the trees. We stayed awake until dawn. When the first grey light came, the extra footprints were gone. The wall of trees that had blocked the trail had opened again. The path looked exactly as it had the day before. We walked out in silence. We didn't speak until we reached the car. Derek and Chris were never found. Search teams covered every inch of that section of forest. They found no clothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The official conclusion was that the 2 men left camp on their own and became lost. The forest is large. People disappear. I know what I heard that night. I know what touched our tent. I know the fire should not have gone out. 3 weeks after we returned, Sophia left me. She said she couldn't sleep next to anyone anymore. She said every time the room got quiet, she heard footsteps matching her breathing. I still camp sometimes. Never in deep forest, never without other people nearby, Never after midnight. But some nights, when the wind moves through the trees outside my window, I hear a soft dragging sound against the glass. And every time I look at the clock, it is 2:17. I never saw the thing that followed me. I only ever heard it. That is the part that still ruins me. If I had seen it even once, a shape, a face, a pair of eyes, I could have told myself it was an animal or a person or a trick of the dark. But I never saw it. Not on the first night. Not on the second. Not even at the very end, when it finally stood close enough that I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. My name is Evan. I was 26 the autumn I went into the forest alone. I had been through a bad breakup. I had lost my job. I wanted silence more than I wanted safety. So I drove 4 hours north into the Cascade Range, parked at an empty trailhead, and walked 6 miles into a section of woods the map marked only as primitive. No campsites, no rangers, no cell service. Exactly what I thought I needed. I set up my tent in a small clearing beside a dry creek bed. The trees were old and tight together. The light died early. By 6:30, the forest was already black. I made a small fire, heated a can of chili, and sat with my back against a log, listening to the quiet. That first night, the quiet felt clean. I went to sleep around 10. I woke at 1:14 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. They were not close. They were not loud. They moved through the dry leaves in a slow, steady rhythm somewhere behind my tent. Step, pause, step, pause. The pace was wrong for a deer or a bear. It was the pace of something that had all the time in the world. I lay completely still and listened. The footsteps circled the clearing once, then they stopped directly behind the tent, no more than 10 feet away. I waited for them to move on. They did not. For almost 40 minutes I listened to whatever it was standing in the dark, breathing so quietly I could barely hear it. Then, without warning, the footsteps started again and walked away into the trees until I could no longer hear them. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning the forest looked ordinary. No tracks in the soft ground, no broken branches, nothing to prove the night had happened. I told myself it had been a trick of exhaustion and nerves. I stayed one more day because turning around felt like admitting I was afraid. The second night the footsteps returned at 1:14 a.m. exactly. This time they came closer. They walked a full circle around the tent, slow and deliberate. Then they stopped at the entrance. I heard the soft sound of fingers, or something like fingers, brushing the nylon from the outside, testing the zipper, sliding down the seam. I had a knife in my hand. I did not open the tent. I did not make a sound. After a long time, the touching stopped. The footsteps moved to the rear of the tent and stayed there until first light. When the sky finally turned grey, whatever had been standing behind me walked away without hurry. That morning I packed everything with shaking hands and started the hike out. The forest did not want me to leave. The trail I had followed in was gone. In its place were 3 different paths that all looked identical. My compass spun slowly and without purpose. The trees seemed to lean inward the farther I walked. After 2 hours I realized I had been climbing when I should have been descending. The creek bed I had camped beside never reappeared. I was lost. I tried not to panic. I picked the path that felt most downhill and kept walking. By late afternoon the light was already failing. I had no choice but to make camp again. That third night I did not build a fire. I did not eat. I sat inside the tent with the knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other, waiting. At 1:14 a.m. the footsteps returned. They did not circle this time. They walked straight to the front of the tent and stopped. I heard breathing. Slow, wet, patient, only inches from my face on the other side of the thin nylon. Then a voice spoke. It was not loud, it was almost gentle. You walked into my woods. I could not answer. My throat had closed. The voice continued, still soft. I have been walking behind you since the first night. You never turned around. That was smart. Most of them turn around. I heard the sound of something long and thin dragging across the ground outside. It moved along the side of the tent, then the back, then the other side, until it had completed a full circle. I am going to count to 3, the voice said. When I reach 3, you will open the zipper. If you do not open it, I will open it for you. Either way, the walking ends tonight. I pressed the knife against my own leg hard enough to feel the point. The pain kept me from screaming. 1. The breathing grew louder. 2. Something settled its weight against the front of the tent. The nylon stretched inward. 3. I did not open the zipper. For a moment nothing happened. Then the tent began to collapse from the top down, as if a great weight had settled on it. The poles snapped. The fabric pressed against my face and chest. I could not move. I could not breathe. The knife was trapped against my side. The last thing I heard was the voice, no longer gentle, speaking directly into my ear through the compressed nylon. You should have turned around on the first night. I only follow the ones who never look back. The pressure increased until the dark behind my eyes became complete. They found my tent 6 days later, perfectly pitched in a clearing I had never camped in. My backpack was inside, neatly packed. My boots were placed side by side at the entrance. The knife was missing. My body was never found. The official report said I must have left camp on my own and become lost in the wilderness. It happens every year. But the searchers who found the tent wrote something in their private notes that never made the public file. They said the ground around the tent was covered in footprints. Hundreds of them, all the same size. And every single footprint faced the tent, as if whatever made them had stood there for a very long time, waiting for someone who never came out.